Welcome back to the channel. My name's Danny, and today on TechDriven, I'm going to be talking about sim racing setups and the kind of rabbit hole or addiction that grows as you get more hooked into racing games. Now, many years ago on this channel, I reviewed a Logitech G920, and I'm going to link that down below. It's a really old video done in my parents' basement, but if you want to have some laughs, there you go. And I thought at the time that was the greatest and best wheel ever. And I rocked that wheel from that video all the way up until I think about 2 years ago when it failed. I picked up a secondhand G920, which is basically the newer version of it, just Xbox, and fixed the G27, sold the G27, and now I've upgraded again from the G920 to a Fanatec direct drive. Now, brands today don't matter, but this is what I chose, and maybe one day I'll go into why I chose this. But I wanted a direct drive, and I went with this. And it has been one of the best decisions for sim racing. So today I want to talk about that progression, that upgrade path that I went down, and also the different setups I had. This is an aluminum profile rig. I had a play seat, and I originally started racing on a desk. So stick around. Before we talk about the direct drive setup, let's talk about a few more basic setups that I would say 90% of people who want more out of their racing titles other than just playing with a controller would like to upgrade to. Now, a controller is probably how most people have experienced their very first racing game. Now, myself included, is a little bit different, as the first racing game I ever played was Need for Speed 1 on a keyboard, and then experienced racing games on a Sega Genesis, which was on like a D-pad and not an analog stick, and eventually tried out Gran Turismo 2 on PS1. So slowly made progression from very basic controllers to now a controller, and eventually upgraded to a steering wheel on my PC. So years ago, I did a review, like I said in the intro, of a G27. I'll link it below, but it's the same wheel as this Logitech G920. All these Logitech G series wheels, except for the G Pro, are basically the same wheel. It's just some work for PlayStation, some work for Xbox, and the PlayStation and the Xbox ones both work for PC. The G25 was the first version of this. The G27 was the updated version, which is the one I had. This is the Xbox. The newer one is the G920, and there's a G923, I believe, and a few others that are newer that have like the True Force and whatever stuff, but we're not really getting into the weeds about that. But they're all essentially the same wheel. They get you a wheel with 900 degrees of rotation, about 2.5 Newton meters of torque, gear-driven motor with 3 pedals, and an optional gear shift. Now, the G25 and the G27 did come with a gear shift in the box, which I think is the way these should have came. But it was an awesome setup. I used it for years on a glass desk, and I just put rubber grippies on it to help it from sliding off while I was playing iRacing. But over time, having that set up on a desk, as some of you probably know, every time you want to play a racing game, you got to take the wheel out of the closet or from out from under your desk, and then clear your desk if you have a messy desk or you just have a small desk. And then you have to set it up, and every time you have to set it up. And then the pedals on the carpet, sometimes they moved, or if they were on tile or hardwood floor, they would slide. And there's a lot of little things, right? And it just leaves you wanting a more dedicated setup. And hence why I eventually bought a play seat. The play seat fit my space. This is exactly how I had it set up. The only difference would be I would grab my screen that is here, and I would move it to the edge of the desk, so it was almost like a cockpit, and it worked really well. Then eventually I upgraded the play seat with a fake Recaro seat, and I'll show you that. It's the same seat that's in the aluminum rig. So this is a fake Recaro SR2. It's a blue cloth. It's kind of sun faded, but I got this off Marketplace for $100 for a guy, and it was an amazing upgrade to this rig. And it's amazing that I still carried that seat over to the new rig. Eventually I will upgrade the seat, but it was a great upgrade, improved comfortability. But the downsides about this rig, sure, the price is great if you can find a good deal on one used, or if you don't have the room for a full rig like this, you can get a wheel stand or a foldable wheel stand, which is great if you have a small space. This, sure, it can be compacted. You can fold the seat down, you can shrink this out, but that's kind of a pain in the butt, and kind of defeats the purpose of having a dedicated setup. Usually what you would do, what I did was, I measured the distance of the wheel to the chair, the edge of the chair to the edge of the pedals to almost replicate the driving position in my cars. And I really did that with the profile rig. On this, you can get pretty close. And I would say I did a good job. And this is a quick setup to kind of get me comfortable just for the video. But I did like that aspect. And where a wheel stand, you just use your desk chair. And with that, it still leaves a little bit to desire. Some of the wheel stands are compatible with direct drives, and also some of the newer PlaySeats are compatible with direct drive wheels, which is fantastic. So you don't have to spend $900 on an aluminum profile rig. You can go a lot cheaper. So that is nice. The downside about this being cheaper, more basic, and simpler, well, it's got a lot of flex. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around that. The pedal stand has a lot of flex, and without even trying, it just flexes. And as you're driving, even with the 2 Nm wheel, the whole center post moves around. So it's good, but it's not great. Now that we've had a chance to talk about the PlaySeat setup, a wheel stand setup, a wheel mounted to a desk, and also just the benefits of a more basic wheel like a Logitech, it being plug and play, low entry of cost, right? So they are relatively inexpensive. You can get them cheap, secondhand, and even new, they're not that expensive. As well as, Thrustmaster has the same benefits, but also it's belt driven, so they're a little quieter than the gear driven of Logitech. But if you want that extra level of realism and that extra level of just like refinement and quality, well, this is where you kind of have to go. A direct drive wheel offers an amazing level of detail when driving. It has a literally silent operation because there's like literally one moving part, the giant electric motor. And the force feedback that you get is just unmatched compared to a gear-driven wheel. Sure, I've had a lot of fun with my Logitech wheel for many, many, many years, and still to this day, I would keep driving a Logitech wheel. But I really wanted to upgrade to something like this, as this was something I wanted to grow into and really maximize. And I don't think I would ever really upgrade from this 8 Nm wheel base unless I got something else PlayStation compatible to replace this base with. And that's really the only time I see myself replacing it. But for the cost to just get a PlayStation compatible wheelbase is not worth it, I think, just to play Gran Turismo. I did that before. I bought a PS3 just for Gran Turismo 5 and it was massively disappointed. I would really recommend, if you want to upgrade to a direct drive, I can talk until I'm blue in the face and say direct drive is the best thing ever and you should totally upgrade to it, but there's a million options. You can get lower cost options that like a Moza R3 or a Canvas wheel, as they have those wheels that it's the whole wheel hub and the rim is what moves and the hub stays centered, which is kind of like a Citroen. And those are a lot cheaper and they can mount to your desk. And I actually have a friend that has the Canvas wheel and he really likes it. I think it's a little weird looking, but it's awesome for the price and you can't go wrong. And it really kind of puts Logitech in a weird position. I went with Fanatec because at the time, the Logitech G Pro didn't have any optional wheels. I really like the wheel that I'm eventually going to buy for this, which is the Club Sport wheel, which was the old Porsche steering wheel, and now without the Porsche branding. It'll be really cool when I get that, as it's a leather-wrapped wheel versus the rubber wheel that I have right now, as I have the base wheel. As well as I did the CSL pedals from Fanatec when I did the whole wheel setup and upgraded to their load cell brake pedal, which offers a really awesome braking feel and it gives you a lot of modulation. I also changed out the bushings to give me a little bit more brake pedal travel, so I was able to get more accurate braking for my personal preference. And I just had to try different bushings to get the exact feel I wanted, as well as I added an RC shock to the gas pedal to add a little bit more resistance. Unfortunately, because it was a cheap shock, the seals blew out. I'm gonna have to go to the RC store and find some better seals that actually do their job. The clutch pedal is the stock brake pedal. The only thing that you change is you take out the rubber bushing in there, so it just gives a very linear feel, and it works totally fine as a clutch pedal. So for drifting, it's great for clutch kicking to get the RPM back up when you're in a big drift and you're losing RPM because you're in a low power BMW E36 and you're... The actual chassis itself is an 80/20 aluminum profile. This is a 6 Sigma rig. This is kind of their middle of the road rig. GT Omega also makes one very similar to this. Track Racer makes one very similar to this. Also, Advanced Racing Sim also makes one very similar to this. So They're all kind of the same. You could build this yourself. If you look at the manuals, all the parts are there, all the measurements are there, so you could totally build this yourself and piece all the parts together. That is a very real possibility. I've seen some people do it cheaper than the pre-builts, but I find now the pre-built stuff is cheaper than building it yourself. You got to also think about all the hardware that this includes, all these little brackets and then end caps for everything just to clean it up and make it look nice. That's something that comes part of a pre-build versus doing it yourself. And when I say pre-built, it's still a kit. You got to put this thing together. It comes in a flat pack box, and you take all the pieces out and you inventory it and then go through and build it. Here's some footage of me building this. But overall, this chassis is really, really cool. Some of the things about aluminum profile chassis are optional extras. So the way my wheel is mounted with the side plates, my wheelbase is mounted into the chassis. So these uprights come here and they bolt directly into the chassis by having the M8 bolts to go into T-nuts slid into the wheel base. So not only does that give me a lot more of adjustment for how my wheel is placed, up and down, tilting, unlimited adjustability, which I actually really, really like because I was able to replicate the steering angle and position of the R32 steering wheel, how I drive when I'm in track mode. But as well as that actually stiffens the chassis even more because it's not mounted on top of this bar, on top of like a little universal steel wheel plate. So now it's integrated into the chassis. And I just think it looks badass, and it reminds me of the F50 with the way the suspension hangs off the engine on the back of the car. So that's, yeah, it's cool as shit. As well as I have a shifter plate that was included with this, which is generally optional extra, and as well as the mouse pad, which was optional extra, but it was included at the time of purchase. And so I use that as a keyboard and a glove holder, as well as my shifter and handbrake holder. So which works really, really cool. Now, one of the things about a lot of and all the aluminum profile rigs is seats are extra, seat rails are extra, seat mounting is all extra. So when you buy them, they come bare bones. You do not get a fancy screen mount. You do not get fancy pedals and wheel and all this stuff. You just get the chassis. And you gotta like option it out yourself. So that's one of the things that's nice about it, but it can get very expensive very quickly. But the way I have this set up on the little wood pallet that I made, it's very easy to get into. It's very comfortable now. With the screen set up the way it's set up, it's really, really awesome. The shifter is in a great location. The handbrake's in a great location. The keyboard is very accessible when you need it, so you can control the computer with this Logitech K400 Plus. So it's got a trackpad and also full mouse controls and full audio controls built in. It's a full multimedia keyboard meant for home theater computers, but I'm using it for my sim racing, which is really, really cool. I also have a second one of these keyboards for my home theater computer. And the reason why I have sim racing gloves is, well, they were included with the rig, but I was going to buy a pair anyways because I get really sweaty hands when I race for more than an hour. So those are useful for me. When I'm racing, I usually wear shoes because the brake pedal is very firm. It feels like non-assisted brakes. Like I said also, with the direct drive wheel, I was mentioning earlier, you can purchase different wheels. A lot of them all have quick release wheels, so you can change out the wheels. Also, having a quick release makes it easier to get in and out of the rig, depending on how you have your stuff set up, and to change out the steering wheel, which is really, really nice. The steering wheel I bought is just the base Fanatec one until I get the Club Sport steering wheel. But overall, this is a really nice setup. I'm really happy with the way this setup has evolved over the last year to this stage. I went from a wall-mounted screen to then just literally this past weekend doing this big crazy setup. Now, the only downside about this setup is the screen itself. And you might be thinking, wow, 34 ultra-wide. How is that the weak point of the entire setup? Well, it's the way that the screen is mounted. It's got a lot of wiggle, like a lot of wiggle. And you can't fix that because it's the actual mount for the screen built into the screen. So, unfortunately, it is what it is. But future plans with this is I do want to set up a full surround sound setup, so that's why the bar's up here. It's going to give me a place to put a center mount speaker, and then I want to do 2 speakers kind of out here, and then 2 more speakers behind me, and have that full surround sound effect. I did try it out a very ghetto way when I had this set up before, where the whole chassis came out this way from the wall as the screen came off the wall like this. and it was awesome. You could hear the cars coming up from behind you, coming up beside you, and it really filled in the gaps of maybe sometimes where you couldn't see. Headphones do a great job, but the surround sound was something that was next level, and I really, really enjoyed. Now, if you're looking at purchasing something like this, I would suggest upgrading the rig before upgrading the wheel. If you already have a Logitech wheel and say you have a very flimsy rig, just upgrading the rig itself changed so much in levels of comfort and ergonomics, but then upgrading to a better wheel is just, that takes it to a whole nother level. So my quick summary of this chassis. We'll definitely go into it more and talk about more stuff about it in the future and maybe do some driving. Just let me know what you guys would like to see. Unfortunately, the PlaySeat's going to be gone tomorrow, along with the Logitech wheel, as that is now sold. But that has been a fantastic wheel, and I wanted to do this as a send-off to that, and this is now the current main racing rig. So if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down for any future content you'd like to see on the channel. I'm going to do my best to post videos again on a regular schedule, as well as I'm starting a second channel that's going to be about car stuff and me working on cars. And this is still going to be related to tech. This is as far into cars we'll ever get on this channel, is talking about sim racing. Everything else will be computers, water cooling, maybe modifying my original Xboxes, and other crazy stuff I can come up with.